June 1874, outside Abilene, Kansas, the heat baked the dirt into cracked plates under the hooves of a worn-out mare, and Quentin Fletcher's boots hit the ground with a soft thud as he stepped off. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the auction yard behind the saloon. It was supposed to be a livestock sale, or so the sign said, but what stood on the makeshift platform was not cattle. It was one girl. She could not have been more than 20. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, face smeared with dust and dried blood. A bruised eye blinked at the crowd, lips chapped, hands bound in front. The auctioneer barked out, $2, girls strong, can cook, clean, no family, no trouble, any takers. A drunk man laughed, tossed a coin. She ain't worth a cent, call her what she is, worthless. The name stuck. The crowd jeered. Quentin did not speak. He just stepped forward, pulled out $3 silver and placed them on the wood. Sold. The girl did not flinch when he cut the rope from her wrists. She did not thank him. She just looked at him like someone waiting for the next blow. He did not offer words, only motioned to his horse. They rode in silence. Quentin's ranch sat 10 miles out of town, a long, weathered stretch of land framed by cottonwoods and a creek that ran low in summer but never dry. There were 2 children waiting on the porch, his own. Frances, age 9, sat with her arms crossed, her wild curls stuck to her face with sweat. Felix, 7, was barefoot, holding a stick like a sword. "Who's that?" Frances asked. "Her name's—" Quentin paused. He turned to the girl. "What should I call you?" "Call me worthless," she said flat. "No," Quentin said. "Try again." She looked at the children, then back at him. "Phoebe," he nodded. "Phoebe it is." Phoebe Sutter. She had not spoken the name in so long it felt strange in her mouth. He showed her the bunkhouse. It was clean, small, 1 bed, a table, a pitcher of water. She looked at him, suspicious. "You work if you want or do not, but no one's going to touch you here," Quentin said. "You paid $3, she said. "You own me." "I paid $3 to get you away from men who think a person can be owned." She said nothing. Over the coming days, Phoebe watched. Quentin worked the cattle, fixed a fence, cooked breakfast before the sun rose. He never asked her to do a thing. She fed the chickens one morning, out of habit, cleaned the porch steps the next. By the end of the week, she had taken up mending the children's socks and brushing Frances's hair. One afternoon, Quentin found her sitting on the porch steps with Felix on her lap, his small hand curled around hers as she taught him to whistle. "You are good with them," Quentin said. "I did not know I would be," she replied. "I thought I hated children. They seem to love you." Phoebe smiled, small and unsure. "They are easy to love. They do not expect anything." Quentin sat beside her, close enough to share the shade. "You deserve to be loved without expectation, too." She looked down at her hands. "You do not know what I have done." "I do not care." She stood quickly, the words too much. I need to check the water bucket." He let her go. That night, a storm rolled in from the west. Thunder cracked hard enough to shake the windows. Phoebe sat up in the bunkhouse, heart pounding. She could not remember where she was, only that the sound had once meant fists. A knock came at the door. "Phoebe," Quentin's voice low and calm, "the children are scared. Will you sit with them?" She opened the door without thinking. In the main house, Frances was curled under a blanket, her face wet with tears. Felix held tight to a stuffed rabbit. Phoebe climbed into the bed between them, arms around both. Quentin watched from the doorway. She met his eyes. "I am not scared anymore," she whispered. He nodded once. "Good." The storm passed by morning. Phoebe began to smile more. She started singing when she fed the chickens. She fixed the hinges on the door without being asked. She stitched Quentin's torn shirts and set his coffee on the table before dawn. He never asked her to. One evening, after the children were asleep and the moon lit the porch silver, Quentin brought out 2 cups of coffee. Phoebe sat beside him, knees nearly touching. "I have not thanked you," she said finally. "You do not need to. I want to." He turned to her. "Then tell me something true." "Just for me." She was quiet for a long time, then, "My father sold me to a man when I was 16. I ran, I got caught, I was passed around. That is how I ended up in Abilene." He did not flinch. "I thought I would never be anything but broken," she said. "But your children laugh when I tickle them. Your home is quiet and kind, and I think I want to live." Quentin reached over, took her hand. She let him. "You do not have to be anything but you, Phoebe," he said. She blinked hard, then leaned her head against his shoulder. And for the first time in her life, she felt safe. He did not kiss her, not yet, but his hand never left hers and she did not let go. And that was the start. By mid-July, the wheat stood knee-high in the south field, sun-bleached and whispering in the wind. Quentin handed Phoebe a wide-brimmed straw hat one morning without comment as they walked the fence line together. The air was heavy with the coming storm season, clouds hanging thick in the west but holding their distance. Phoebe matched his stride easily now. Her strength had settled into her limbs again, not hurried or forced, just steady, like she belonged to the land more than she ever had to any man. "You ever keep bees?" Quentin asked, gesturing to the row of wooden boxes near the orchard. "No," Phoebe said. "But I was stung once trying to catch one in a jar. I thought if I could hold something that made sweetness, I might understand it." He chuckled softly. "They're gentle if you leave them be. I could show you how to work the hives come fall." She didn't answer at first. "Then I think I'd like that." They kept walking. A rabbit startled from the brush, and Phoebe's hand went briefly to her chest, then dropped. Her eyes followed it until the grass swallowed it whole. Back at the house, Frances sat on the porch with a reed basket between her knees, threading long strips of willow with deliberate fingers. Phoebe crouched beside her. "Where'd you learn that?" she asked. "Mrs. Lorna showed me last year, before she moved back east." Phoebe tilted her head. "She kin to you?" "No, but she used to bring books, read to us sometimes." Phoebe smiled, one side of her mouth lifting. "I used to read before." Frances blinked. "You could read to us if you want." "I'd like that," Phoebe said, brushing a bit of bark from Frances's sleeve. Inside, Felix was sprawled on the floor with a tin pail of marbles. Quentin stepped around him, setting a parcel on the table. It held a length of calico, blue with tiny white flowers. "For you," he said to Phoebe as she entered. She looked at the fabric, then at him. "Why? You need a Sunday dress. I don't go to church." "You will if you want to hear Frances sing. She's got her first hymn solo." Phoebe touched the cloth, the pads of her fingers slow and uncertain. "I haven't had a new dress since I was 15. Quentin didn't tell her she deserved it. He just nodded, then turned to help Felix line up the marbles into a makeshift fort. That night, Phoebe stayed up late sewing at the kitchen table, her stitches neat and even. The oil lamp flickered beside her, casting her shadow onto the wall like a woman twice her size. Quentin passed by once, paused, and said, "You like it here." She didn't lift her head. "I don't feel like I'm waiting to be hurt." He leaned a shoulder against the doorframe. "I'm glad." Phoebe glanced at him, needle paused mid-air. "You haven't asked me to leave." "I won't." "What if I did something terrible?" "You didn't. You don't know that." "I don't need to." She set the needle down, the fabric folded in her lap. "You make it hard to keep my walls up." "I know." She rose, stepped closer, and stood before him with her hands clasped at her waist. "I want to earn my place here." "You already have." Phoebe looked at his face a long moment, then reached out and touched his cheek. It was the first time. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't pull away. "I want to stay," she whispered. "With you." He covered her hand with his own. "Then stay." They didn't kiss, not yet, but the silence between them was full and warm, like something rising slow and sure from the earth. Outside, the cicadas had begun their song. Inside, Phoebe's half-sewn dress lay waiting, and the house felt more like home than it ever had. By late August, the prairie grasses had gone gold and brittle, and the wind carried the scent of dust and ripe apples. Phoebe stood in the orchard with a wooden pail tucked against her hip, the hem of her cotton dress brushing her calves as she reached for the higher fruit. The dress fit now, stitched by her own hand, worn and eased into her shape like it had always been hers. Frances and Felix were down by the creek with a neighbor boy, Callum, whose father came by sometimes to trade feed. Phoebe watched them from the rise, the way Frances ran barefoot through the shallows, hair streaming behind her like a banner. She smiled, then turned at the sound of footsteps. Quentin came toward her, sleeves rolled, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. He carried a coil of rope and a small metal tin. "Old Cooper's mare foaled early," he said. "He brought by a jar of honey and asked after your apple cake." "I thought I'd better ask before I promised any." Phoebe wiped her hands on her apron. "He always leans too heavy on the cinnamon, but I'll make him one." "I told him you had good hands." She looked at him, then away. They used to be calloused from scrubbing floors. They're steady now. That's what matters. Phoebe picked another apple and set it in the pail. I found a letter under the bunkhouse floorboard. Quentin's brows drew in. Yours? No, someone else's, signed by a woman named Hattie, dated 6 years back. Looked like she was writing to someone she never sent it to. What did it say? She talked about leaving Nebraska. Said she was going west to start again. Said she was scared, but she'd rather be scared than invisible. Quentin nodded slowly. Maybe she made it. Maybe, Phoebe said, setting the pail down. Or maybe she didn't. Why does it matter to you? Phoebe folded her arms. Because I've started to believe I might keep living. And I wonder if she ever got that far. Quentin reached over, brushing a loose strand of hair from her temple. You've already come farther than most. She didn't step back. You ever think about marrying again? His hand dropped. Sometimes. Would you marry someone like me? He didn't hesitate. Yes, Phoebe's breath caught. I'm not asking, I know, but if I were, I'd say I want the same thing. Phoebe touched the edge of the pail with one hand. I want to know the names of the stars. I want to see the Rockies. I want to wake up and not brace myself. We could ride west come spring, take the wagon slow, and the children, they'd come. Phoebe looked up at him. I don't want to be a guest here anymore. You aren't. I want to belong. You do. She stepped closer. Then ask me. Quentin's voice stayed quiet. Will you be my wife, Phoebe? She nodded, eyes bright. Yes. He reached for her, careful and sure, and when their lips met, it wasn't rushed or hesitant. It was the answer to every wound that had yet to close. Later, after the children came home sun-flushed and wet-footed, Phoebe stood at the stove stirring batter, the ring of apples waiting on the counter. Frances leaned against the table. You look different, she said. Phoebe met her gaze. I feel different, Frances grinned. You look like someone who gets to stay. Phoebe pressed a hand to her chest. I do. Outside, the sky turned the color of copper and the breeze rattled the orchard leaves. Quentin leaned against the doorway, watching her, and for the first time in her life, Phoebe knew exactly where she was meant to be. September settled in with a hush. The bright clamor of summer softened into gold light and long shadows, and the wind came cooler off the plains. Phoebe stood at the washbasin behind the house, wringing out the last of the bedsheets. Her sleeves were rolled, hair coiled up with a single carved pin. She watched the steam rise from the tin bucket and breathed in the scent of lye and sun-warmed cotton. Quentin crossed the yard with a saddlebag slung over his shoulder. His gait was heavier than usual. I got a letter, he said, holding out the envelope. Phoebe dried her hands on her apron before taking it. From who? Marshall in Dodge. He's looking for a man named Clive Harlan. Says he passed through Abilene in the spring, thought I might have seen him. Phoebe unfolded the paper slowly. I know that name. Quentin waited. He was the last one I escaped from. She touched the edge of the letter. He had a scar on his neck like a split root. Always carried a silver ring on a chain, wore it like a trophy. Quentin's jaw tightened. You don't have to read the rest. I want to. Her voice didn't shake. She read through it, then handed it back. They think he's headed south toward the border. He won't come through here. Quentin didn't speak right away. Then, if he does, he won't leave the same. Phoebe looked at him, head tilted. You'd kill for me, he met her gaze. I'd protect what's mine. She nodded once, then picked up the basket of damp linens and started toward the clothesline. Quentin followed, not close enough to crowd her, but near enough she could feel the shape of his presence. You remember that mare I had put down last spring? He asked. Phoebe glanced over. The one with the bad leg she was carrying. I didn't know it until after. I buried the foal beside her. Phoebe reached for the line, hanging a sheet with practiced hands. Why are you telling me this? I don't want to keep anything from you. Not even the things that still ache. She tied off the last corner and stepped back. Then I'll tell you something too. I used to dream about drowning. I'd wake up gasping, hands clenched, but it stopped last week. Quentin tilted his head. What changed? I think I finally believe no one's holding me under. They stood in the hush of the yard, the white sheets fluttering like ghosts released. Phoebe turned toward him, brushing a curl from her brow. Do you ever miss the life you had before all this? She asked. I miss my wife. Not the loneliness after, what I have now. It's different, not a second chance, a new one. Phoebe's fingers brushed against his. I want to tell the children soon, he nodded. We'll do it together. Inside, Francis was sorting through a box of buttons by the hearth while Felix arranged dried corn husks for dolls. Phoebe knelt beside them. "Your father and I have decided something," she said, folding her hands in her lap. "We're going to marry before the frost." "We wanted you to know first," Francis blinked. "You already feel like ours." Felix held up a misshapen doll. "Can I make you a wedding one?" Phoebe's eyes stung, but she smiled. "I'd like that more than anything." Later, Quentin lit the lanterns while Phoebe folded away the last of the laundry. They didn't speak much, but their silences had a rhythm now, like the hush before rain, like breath drawn in peace. That night, as the fire burned low and the children slept, Phoebe sat on the porch steps with a blanket over her shoulders. Quentin joined her, handing over a mug filled with warmed cider. "I want to build another bedroom on the house," he said. "Not just for the wedding, for the life we're building." Phoebe looked out at the dark field. "I used to think I didn't deserve a home that grew with me. And now," she leaned against him, their shoulders touching, "now I think I'd like to plant an orchard of my own someday, something that lasts." Quentin reached for her hand. She let him, her fingers threading into his. The night held no fear, only quiet and stars and the sound of wind moving gently through the grass. The morning of the wedding came with a frost so light it kissed only the tops of the grass, leaving the rest untouched. Phoebe rose before the sun and stood at the washstand in the main house, brushing her hair by lamplight. The small silver pin Quentin had carved for her from cottonwood sat beside the basin. She hadn't worn it since the day he gave it to her, said she'd save it for something that felt like a beginning. She pinned her hair up slow, one coil at a time. Francis waited in the kitchen, holding a bundle of dried prairie flowers wrapped in muslin. "I picked them yesterday," she said. Before the frost got them, Phoebe took them carefully. "They're perfect." Francis glanced down. "You nervous?" "No," Phoebe said. "I think I've already done the hard part." The small gathering took place beside the creek, where the cottonwoods bent like old friends. Quentin had cleared a path through the brush himself, and Felix laid down a trail of river stones leading up to where the preacher stood with his hat in his hands. Phoebe's dress was simple, cream-colored calico with a row of cloth-covered buttons down the back. She had sewn every stitch herself over the last few weeks, her hands steady, her mind clear. Quentin waited beneath the wide limbs of the cottonwood, coat pressed and boots cleaned like he'd stepped out of another life. His eyes didn't search the crowd, he looked only at her. When she reached him, she took his hand without pause. The preacher spoke few words. The vows were plain, spoken in the same voices they used every day, no trembling, no grandness. Just truth. When it was done, Quentin kissed her gently, one hand at her waist, the other against her cheek. It was the kind of kiss that didn't need to prove anything. The children whooped, and someone handed around tin cups of cider. There was no music but the trickle of the creek and the wind moving through the trees. Phoebe didn't cry. She didn't need to. That night they stayed in the main house. Quentin had built the new bedroom by hand, and though the wood still smelled fresh and the floor creaked in places, it was theirs. A quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed, the one Francis had pieced with fabric scraps Phoebe had saved since late spring. As Quentin unlaced his boots, Phoebe sat at the edge of the bed, her fingers brushing the carved bedpost. "I used to think I'd never be touched again without going numb inside," she said. Quentin didn't move. "And now, I'm not afraid." He came to her slowly, kneeling so their faces were level. "You never have to be." She touched the space just above his collarbone. "I want to be your wife in every way." He kissed her again, and this time it was unhurried, deep, like the land they stood on, quiet, strong, unshifting. They lay together as the fire burned low, wrapped in the hush of the prairie night. Weeks passed. The last of the harvest came in just ahead of the first hard frost. Phoebe taught Francis how to render lard for pie crust, and Felix started carving small animals from leftover kindling. Quentin built a smokehouse behind the barn, and Phoebe helped him salt the meat. One afternoon, as they shelled beans on the porch, Phoebe turned to Quentin. "I want to adopt them," she said. He didn't ask why, he just nodded. "They already see you as theirs. I want it to be true on paper too." They rode to town the next week, papers in hand and signed in ink that didn't smudge. Winter came in early that year, and with it, a stillness that settled deep into the bones. Inside, the house was warm, wood stacked high beside the hearth, wool socks drying by the stove, laughter echoing across the rooms. One evening, as snow fell in soft sheets across the yard, Quentin sat on the floor by the fire, carving a bird from a piece of walnut. Phoebe sat behind him, brushing his hair back from his neck. "You ever wish we'd met sooner?" she asked. He set the carving down. "No, I wouldn't have known what to do with you back then." She leaned against him. "I think I had to get lost before I could be found." Quentin turned, his eyes tracing her face. "You weren't lost, you were surviving. I'm not just surviving anymore." "No," he said. "You're living." She kissed him, slow and sure, and when they pulled apart, she whispered, "I love you." He smiled, and this time she saw it reach all the way to the place behind his eyes that used to hold sorrow. "I love you too." Years passed, the orchard grew. The children did too. Frances, taller than her mother by 16, full-voiced and fearless. Felix, quiet, thoughtful, hands always busy with knife or quill. They called Phoebe Ma without pause or hesitation. One spring, Quentin built a second barn. Phoebe planted a hedge of honeysuckle along the fence. In the evenings, they sat on the porch with coffee and watched the sky change. They never left for the Rockies. They didn't need to, because the life they built stood firm, not because it was easy, but because they had earned every piece of it. Together,